Thank you for tuning in to The Global Novel. I'm Claire Hennessy. Anna Karenina is a novel by the Russian author Leo Tolstoy, first published in book form in 1878. Widely considered to be one of the greatest works of literature ever written, Tolstoy himself called it his first true novel. It was initially released in serial installments from 1875 to 1877, all but the last part appearing in the periodical The Russian Messenger. Today, we will explore the novel's themes, storytelling, and translation, followed by my interview with one of Tolstoy's biographers, Dr. Bob Blaisdell. A complex novel in 8 parts with more than a dozen major characters. Anna Karenina is often published in more than 800 pages. It deals with themes of betrayal, faith, family, marriage, imperial Russian society, desire, and rural versus city life. The story centers on an extramarital affair between Anna and the dashing cavalry officer Count Alexei Vronsky that scandalizes the social circles of St. Petersburg and forces the young lovers to flee to Italy in a search for happiness. But after they return to Russia, their lives further unravel. Trains are a motif throughout the novel, with several major plot points taking place either on passenger trains or at stations in St. Petersburg or elsewhere in Russia. The story takes place against the backdrop of the liberal reforms initiated by Emperor Alexander II of Russia and the rapid societal transformations that followed. The novel has been adapted into various media, including theater, opera, film, television, ballet, figure skating, and radio drama. The novel consists of more than the story of Anna Karenina, a married socialite, and her affair with the affluent Count Vronsky, though their relationship is a very strong component of the plot. The story starts when she arrives in the midst of her brother's family being broken up by his unbridled womanizing, something that prefigures her own later situation. A bachelor, Vronsky is eager to marry Anna if she will agree to leave her husband Karenin, a senior government official. Although Vronsky and Anna go to Italy, where they can be together, leaving behind Anna's child from her first marriage, they have trouble making friends. When they return to Russia, Anna suffers shunning and isolation due to the relationship. While Vronsky pursues his social life, Anna grows increasingly possessive and paranoid about his supposed infidelity. A parallel story within the novel is that of Konstantin Levin, a wealthy country landowner who wants to marry Kitty, sister to Dolly and sister-in-law to Anna's brother Stepan Oblonsky. Levin has to propose twice before Kitty accepts. The novel details Levin's difficulties managing his estate, his eventual marriage, and his struggle to accept the Christian faith until the birth of his first child. The novel explores a diverse range of topics throughout its approximately 1,000 pages. Some of these topics include an evaluation of the feudal system that existed in Russia at the time, politics not only in the Russian government but also at the level of the individual characters and families, religion, morality, gender, and social class. Tolstoy's style in Anna Karenina is considered by many critics to be transitional, forming a bridge between the realist and modernist novel. According to Ruth Benson in her book about Tolstoy's heroines, Tolstoy's diaries show how displeased he was with his style and approach to writing in early drafts of Anna Karenina, quoting him as stating, "I loathe what I have written. The galleys of Anna Karenina for the April issue of Ruski Vestnik now lie on my table, and I really don't have the heart to correct them. Everything in them is so rotten, and the whole thing should be rewritten. All that has been printed, too, scraped and melted down, thrown away, renounced." Anna Karenina is commonly thought to explore the themes of hypocrisy, jealousy, faith, fidelity, family, marriage, society, progress, carnal desire and passion, and the agrarian connection to land in contrast to the lifestyles of the city. According to literary theorist Cornélie Cavas, in the novel Anna Karenina, unofficial institutions of the system, presented through social salons, function as part of the power apparatus that successfully calms the disorder created by Anna's irrational emotional action, which is a symbol of resistance to the system of social behavioral control. Translator Rosemary Edmonds wrote that Tolstoy does not explicitly moralize in the book, but instead allows his themes to emerge naturally from the vast panorama of Russian life. She also says one of the novel's key messages is that no one may build their happiness on another's pain. Levin is often considered a semi-autobiographical portrayal of Tolstoy's own beliefs, struggles, and life events. Tolstoy's first name was Lev, and the Russian surname Levin means of Lev. According to footnotes in the Pavel Volonkovsky translation, the viewpoints Levin supports throughout the novel in his argument match Tolstoy's outspoken views on the same issues. The events in the novel take place against the backdrop of rapid transformations as a result of the liberal reforms initiated by Emperor Alexander II of Russia. Principal among these, the Emancipation Reform of 1861, followed by judicial reform, including a jury system, military reforms, the introduction of elected local governments, the fast development of railroads, banks, industry, telegraph, the rise of new business elites, and the decline of the old landed aristocracy, a freer press, the awakening of public opinion, the Pan-Slavism movement, the women question, volunteering to aid Serbia in its military conflict within the Ottoman Empire in 1876, etc. These contemporary developments are hotly debated by the characters in the novel. Writing in the year 2000, academic Zola Pavlovsky-Petit compared the different translations of Anna Karenina on the market. Commenting on the revision of Constance Garnett's 1901 translation, she says, quote, "The 1965 revision by Kant and Berberova succeeds in correcting errors, tightening the prose, converting Briticism, and casting light on areas Mrs. Garnett did not explore. Their edition shows an excellent understanding of the details of Tolstoy's world. For instance, the fact that the elaborate coiffure Kitty wears to the ball is not her own hair, a detail that eludes most other translators. And at the same time, they use English imaginatively. For example, Kitty's shoes delighted her feet, rather than seemed to make her feet lighter. The purist will be pleased to see Kant and Berberova give all the Russian names in full as used by the author. Any reader will be grateful for the footnotes that elucidate anything not immediately accessible to someone not well acquainted with Imperial Russia. This amended Garnett should probably be a reader's first choice," unquote. She further comments on the Moll's translation, quote, "The revised Garnett and the Margashak versions do better justice to the original, but still the World's Classics edition, which is the 1995 edition, offers a very full list of characters and good notes based on the Moll's." On Edmonds' translation, she states, quote, "It has the advantage of solid scholarship, yet she lacks a true sensitivity for the language, leading to her missing many a subtlety," unquote. On Carmichael's version, she comments, quote, "This is a rather breezily readable translation, but there are errors and misunderstandings as well as clumsiness," unquote. On Magershak's translation, she comments, quote, "It offers natural, simple, and direct English prose that is appropriate to Tolstoy's Russian. There is occasional awkwardness and imprecision, but Magershak understands the text, and even when unable to translate an idiom closely, he renders its real meaning. This is a good translation," unquote. On Wetland's Soviet version, she writes, quote, "Steady but uninspired, and sounds like English prose written by a Russian who knows the language but is not completely at home in it. The advantage is that Wetland misses hardly any cultural detail," unquote. In Quest of Tolstoy, Hugh MacLean devotes a full chapter on Which English Anna?, comparing different translations of Anna Karenina. His conclusion after comparing 7 translations is that Pavir and Volonkowski translation, while perfectly adequate, is, in my view, not consistently or unequivocally superior to others in the market. He states his recommendations in the last 2 pages of the survey, quote, "None of the existing translations is actively bad. One's choice must therefore be based on nuances, subtleties, and refinements," unquote. He eliminates the mods for disturbing errors and did not find either the Magershak or Carmichael ever superior to others, and the lack of notes is a drawback. On Adamant's version, he states, "Her version has no notes at all and all too frequently errs in the direction of making Tolstoy's robust awkwardness conform to the translator's notion of good English style." MacLean's recommendations are the Kant-Barbarova revision of Garnett's translation and Pavir and Volonkowski version. Quote, "I consider the Garnett-Kant-Barbarova a very good version, even though it is based on an out-of-date Russian text. Kant and Barbarova did a much more thorough and careful revision of Garnett's translation than Gibbon did of the mulled one, and they have supplied fairly full notes, conveniently printed at the bottom of the page." Unquote. MacLean takes Pavir and Volonkowski to task for not using the best critical text, which is the Zeidenschner-Zdanov text, and offering flawed notes without consulting C.J. Turner's A Karenina Companion published in 1993. Although he calls their version certainly a good translation. Reviewing the translations by Bartlett and Schwartz for the New York Times Book Review, Masha Gessen noted that each new translation of Anna Karenina ended up highlighting an aspect of Tolstoy's variable voice in the novel, and thus the Tolstoy of Garnett is a monocled British gentleman who is simply incapable of taking his characters as seriously as they take themselves. Pavir and Volonkowski created a reasonable, calm storyteller who communicated in conversational American English. Rosamund Bartlett creates an updated, ironic Brit version of Tolstoy. Marianne Schwartz has produced what is probably the least smooth-taking and most contradictory Tolstoy yet. Gessen found Schwartz's translation to be formally closer to the original Russian, but often weighed down with details as a result. Bartlett's translation, like Pavir and Volonkowski's, was rendered in a more idiomatic English and more readable. All told, realistically illuminated by almost irresistible characters, Anna Karenina is among the best loved of all novels, penetrating to the heart of the ruling class in the Tsarist Russia. You're now listening to The Global Novel, a podcast that surveys the narratology of world literatures from antiquity to modernity through a critical lens and aims to make academic education in literature accessible to the world. You can now join our Facebook group by the name The Global Novel. Anna Karenina is one of the most nuanced characters in world literature, and we return to her and the novel she propels again and again. Joining us today is critic and professor Bob Blaisdell, who unravels the novel's author Leo Tolstoy's family, literary, and day-to-day life during the period that he conceived, drafted, abandoned, and revised Anna Karenina in his recent book titled Creating Anna Karenina. Welcome, and thank you for coming to the Global Novel, Bob.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, if asked to encapsulate the literary status of Anna Karenina in Russian literature and world literature, what would it be? In other words, why should we read Anna Karenina?
That's an interesting question because for me, it's been a vital book since I was 18 years old. The reason why I read it in the first place was because I was a writing student in the College of Creative Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And the writing professor, Marvin Mudrick, who was a literary critic, told us that if we really wanted to be writers, we had to read this book called Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. So that summer, after my freshman year, I read it, and I realized, yes, this was the greatest book I'd ever read. And I read it again that summer. And I read it another 25 times in English before I decided, let's see what it says in Russian. When I was first teaching in New York, I had my students read the first chapter one day in class, and I told them if anybody was interested, I would give them a copy of the book. And I was quite surprised that maybe a half dozen of my students, my community college students, raised their hand. So I brought in a half dozen copies the next week. I don't think you can think about books the same way after you read Anna Karenina. It will change anybody who reads it.
Right. You talked about in your book that you've read at least 20 English translations of the novel. So what is your most favorite English edition and why?
The one I used for my book was the one by Constance Garnett. She was an English woman who learned Russian as an adult. She was brilliant, and she translated several novels by Dostoevsky and 200 stories by Chekhov and War and Peace and Anna Karenina. She did it very fast. I like her literary style. She did it more than 100 years ago. And her Russian was not perfect, and so she's been corrected in little ways. But she's very readable, and I also decided I would use that one because it's accessible to everybody because it's out of copyright and everybody can read it online and download it. I also think the best recent one is by Rosamund Bartlett, who is a great Chekhov scholar and translator.
Let's talk about your book on Tolstoy. Could you please enlighten us what sets this gripping biography apart from the ever-growing pack of monographs on Tolstoy's masterpiece?
Well, I wrote it partly because I wanted to know what the biographies didn't tell me, which was what he was doing in those years of making this amazing book. I assumed he was writing all the time. And one of the first discoveries was, no, he wasn't writing. He was procrastinating. He didn't want to write the book. Even when he was writing the book, he didn't want to write the book. And he took 6 or 7 or 8 months of the 4 years he was writing on it. Completely, he did not touch it. Or he touched it, but he didn't write it. It was a big labor for him. And that was the other discovery. It took him a long time to write because it was really hard to write. But I was interested in all the other things he did while he wasn't doing the thing he needed to do for the money. He needed the money. He wanted the money. He knew he could make a lot of money writing this book. And so he was serializing it, just as today we have serialized shows. But he made his readers wait. Magazine publisher thought they could do it all in a year and a half. And it took 3 years in the journal to come out because Tolstoy just missed his deadlines again and again. So he was doing a lot of other things, including finishing off or redoing a book of stories to teach children how to read and how to develop their reading. And he did a lot of hunting, had children. When he really wanted to work and he couldn't work, he would play cards or play the piano or take long walks, go swimming. I realized he was not an efficient worker. It was a great effort, and it took a lot out of him. I wanted it to be a happy experience for him since it was such an invigorating and exciting and sometimes joyous experience for me as a reader. But it was a great challenge for him.
Right. In the foreword of your book, Boris Streliak, the editor at Los Angeles Review of Books, commented on the significance of your work, which intimately connects us with the tangible historical context undergirding Anna Karenina's leitmotif. Could you please offer us a few glimpses into some of those biographical facts that help readers understand that particular historical and literary era of Tolstoy's?
Tolstoy was writing this novel. He started it in 1873 and he finished it in 1877. The serfs of Russia had been given their freedom in 1860. He was a landowner and a serf owner. As a young man, he had tried to give the serfs their freedom. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was a bad system.
We hope you have enjoyed the episode so far. If you want to hear the entire episode, you can subscribe at theglobalnovel.com/subscribe. Thank you so much for listening.